Mike, I got to say, when it comes to the betting markets, it's been interesting. I don't know if you're. I don't actually know how much you follow the ins and outs of the news for pollsters. I really enjoy pollsters and how they prognosticate on what's going on. There's always this. It's sort of like we see this in financial markets. There'll be a move in the market, and then there'll be 10 people on the news explaining why that move happens, and then their fundamentals end up being completely wrong, or the market changes completely, and then they're back next week with a completely different set of reasons why this is happening. It's like, well, you're just saying something in order to sell your book, which happens with pollsters, right? I follow this channel called the People's Pundit on YouTube, and they're like a pollster, and they what's been fun is that they do like this inside baseball where they tell you what's going on with other pollsters and the numbers, and they run their own numbers, and it's been pretty interesting to see the progress there versus what you see on the news or online. But the most important part here is the magnitude of the move that we saw in betting markets on Polymarket on Kalshi seems to have matched the magnitude of the move for the results that we saw with the election.
Yes.
How did that hit you at all when you saw that? I know we talked about it a little bit the last 2 weeks. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
It's been educational. So I placed some bets on Kalshi around the trend following and mean reversion concepts that I had talked about. What became very educational for me is that I pulled all my bets right before the election. There's no way I was going to trade around that kind of volatility, and I'm not trading through the event either, because my thesis is that this is a tradable market. I'm not trying to predict what the outcome was going to be. I think that was true leading up to the election and the day of the election. As we got closer to election results starting to flow in, the betting markets became increasingly accurate and strikingly more accurate as every hour continued. I think at one point, a couple hours into some of the East Coast results coming in, Kalshi had jumped to a 90% accuracy or 90% chance of Trump winning. And obviously accuracy was pretty spot on by the end of the night. So interestingly, I think one takeaway from all of this is that the betting markets tend to be more accurate as we get closer to the actual event. In the meantime, it seems like a tradable market in my mind. That means there's the potential of operating as a trend follower, as a mean reverting trader, as an arbitrager on these platforms up until the final moment, and then you got to pull the plug and get out of there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think my thought is, interestingly, these betting markets are interestingly accurate towards the tail end of the event, closer to the event itself.
Yeah, that's the thing I was most impressed by, because you had called the idea that there should be a mean reversion for that trend trade within the betting markets leading up to it. And we saw exactly that. We saw the spread just completely collapse down. And I remember in our Slack, we're like, oh my God, it just completely
went right back to 50-50. Yeah, right back to a coin flip. But then suddenly started to drift back in the other direction, which was an interesting additional play. So you can trade the trend up until that reverses, trade the other side, and trade back up into a new trend up until the event itself. As long as I think these markets remain inefficient in that way, and price can move because of the low liquidity that's available in the market so quickly, there's a legitimately interesting tradable market here. However, I'm a little concerned now post-election that there's much volume on these platforms anymore. I'm sure it's dissipated. I was worried about that in advance. I don't know how much more is really showing up. I haven't really been looking at Kalshi, but I would be interested to know if basically most of the betting volume just dissipated. If there's not a lot of participants, it's less of an interesting market, because then you can't really move much size.
Perfect. Well, actually, let's take a look at the interview that the CEO of Polymarket made, Shane Kaplan. It's the first interview he's ever done on the news that he said. So let's just take a look at that, and then we'll come back on the other side.
Big night for prediction markets in calling President Trump-elect as the winner at the polls closed. And in the week leading up to the election, the presidential election contracts on Polymarket, Kalshi, Interactive Brokers, Robinhood all indicated that Trump had a wider lead ahead of Vice President Harris than the traditional polls. And joining us right now in an exclusive interview, the man who I think led so much of this is Shane Kaplan. He is the CEO of Polymarket, and we're thrilled to have you here. Your first interview on TV.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
You've been in the headlines a lot. Before we even get into the whole thing, have you slept? What did you do the night of the election?
It was a late night. And I want to preface, thank you guys for having me. Being really the first people on TV to start talking about. As we got bigger, we went from being like a small niche site to sort of being a mainstream and almost household name fairly quickly. And I think that, if you take a step back, a lot of the criticism and the hit pieces were really like based on misinterpretations of what Polymarket was. And I think that it was difficult to take those at face value when, if anyone really looked into it, it was clear that they were
Well, a lot of
unfounded.
the critique was, are people trying to manipulate the market?
Right.
Could one or two big whales, do something? There was obviously, you did your own investigation into this fellow from France, apparently.
Yes. I think that the thing that people get wrong about Polymarket, the thing that I wish people would understand better, and maybe now that they're more open-minded to it, is that if someone takes a really big position on Trump, for example, there's someone on the other side. There's a counterparty. It's all peer-to-peer. So there's also a really big position being taken on Harris. And because of that, and when you see the odds on Polymarket, it's not a function of how much money was put on either side. It's a function of market price at that moment. And usually there's a 0.1 cent spread. It's the tightest spread for this market in the world. And I think that when you think about it like that, like some trade that someone made 2 weeks ago doesn't have bearing on what the market price is right now. So all I can say is I understand that it's a novel concept and people were skeptical when it came around, but hopefully now people will be a lot more embracing of market-based information.
So even if
All right. So he goes on to talk about this idea that because it's peer to peer, and it's not like what you see in regular markets or in traditional markets, that you don't have like this market maker effect, and so that he's saying that this makes it so that you have less manipulation possible within the markets, and that if someone is placed in a big bet like that, it needs to be absorbed by people who actually do believe that the other side is true. And what this makes me think of is that we didn't see the other way. We didn't see that, let's say, Harris had a huge lead, and that was what was being followed, and then flipped to the other side. What we saw was that the actual bias of the election was there, and then that's what was being exacerbated, if anything, if it was being manipulated. But then, with the results of the essential red sweep that happened, it's hard for me not to see that the magnitude of the spread was indicating something that was actually there, was an indication of what's going on, and that it wasn't solely the trend following that was the mechanism. But there's no way to know for sure. And we'll find out.
I don't see any reason why it's either or, though. I think it's both. I have no problem believing that the market participants involved still express their desire for the outcome of the election, and that they likely made their votes in the same way that they made their bets. That said, I think it's very unlikely that there aren't a number of participants who are acting as market makers between these markets, because there's a trade wherever there's a trade and there's liquidity available, you better believe that arbitrageurs are showing up to these environments. If I can place a bet on one platform and simultaneously place a bet on another platform and make a difference between the spread, I'm going to take advantage of that stat arb opportunity all day long. I have to believe that was going on in these markets. So in some way, somebody's playing a market maker for him to also indicate that there's only 0.01 percent spreads between the bid ask, between those market participants, also indicates to me that market makers were participating in these markets, and that their participation was zero reflection of their belief in one candidate versus the other. They're simply playing a math game here.
Interesting.